Tell us a little bit about what did you feel having debated these people and how they became cheerleaders of American imperialism in Middle East in particular, but in general as well.
I didn't pay a lot of attention to them. I come out of the liberal church. I graduated from Harvard Divinity School. My father was a minister. My mother went to seminary. I mean, I grew up in a religious tradition, but very left wing, social gospel. My father was involved in the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. He was a veteran of World War II, and the gay rights movement, for which the church was very unforgiving and finally pushed him out. My uncle was gay, and he and my dad were real close. Um, so I didn't pay attention to them particularly. But then I had to debate, as you said, Harris at UCLA, and then Berkeley. I debated Hitchens, so I had to read their works, and I was appalled. It was, first of all, they don't know anything about religion. They have a cartoon version of religion, and that's the only thing they can tear down. It's not a religious system that I embrace. I don't believe in angels. I don't really know if there's a heaven or a hell, or nor do I care particularly. They can't. And when I've debated the Christian right, and I wrote a book on the Christian right called American Fascists, the Christian right on the war in America. And as I was debating Harris it was exactly the same as debating the Christian right. They constantly interrupt you because they can't argue about ideas. They've actually never read theology, Karl Barth, Tillich, Niebuhr. They don't know any of this stuff. It's not an exchange of ideas. As I sat on the stage, I felt as if I was debating a member of the Christian right, which I also did for my book, where they would just attack you. I mean, in the case of the Christian right, they said, "Well, you're just a secular humanist." You know, Hitchens interrupts me and goes, "Shame on you for defending suicide bombers," and have never defended suicide bombers, etc. So I recognize the similarity. Chomsky recognized the similarity very early on. He called them, I forget the exact word Noam used, but it was something like fanatics for the state religion.
Right.
But that's what they are. So all of them came to fruition after 9/11. And if you look closely, they all got scared. It was all fear. They don't know anything about the Middle East. They don't know anything about Islam. But they suddenly wanted the U.S. Air Force to bomb every Muslim back to the Stone Age because they were frightened. And then after 9/11, you had a wave of persecutions of Muslims. I was involved in the cases of many, my friend Samuel Arian and others, the Holy Land Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. Many, by the way, Palestinian because it was driven by Israel. And so there was, and then young Muslim kids were being hauled off of subways, and their homes were being invaded and searched. I mean, it was, if you looked at what was happening to the Muslim community, it was quite traumatic. So that fed a kind of racism that became acceptable within public discourse, a kind of demonizations of Muslims and Islam that constantly on the airwaves. I mean, it drove me crazy because these people had never been in the Middle East. I'm an Arabic speaker. They didn't know what they were talking about, but it catered to that racist narrative. And now, that laid the kind of fertile ground for the Islamophobia that you're right is not only rippling through populations, but embraced by governments like the Modi government. The Germans, I mean, look at, if you really look at the history between Germany and Israel, it was a very dirty deal. And the deal was, we will arm you and fund you and defend your apartheid colonial settler state if you will rehabilitate us. And that was the deal.
Mm.
And that's what happened. And the Germans just switched their racist rhetoric, which had been directed towards Jews, towards racist rhetoric against Muslims. The DNA, unfortunately, is the same. And we have seen horrible suppression of dissent on behalf of the Palestinians in Germany, but not just, of course, in Germany. So, yeah, Islamophobia, I think, is tied quite intimately to the settler colonial project in Israel, because let's never forget that the settler colonial project in Israel is almost exclusively run by people of European descent. They're white. And so why does the Christian right embrace Israel? Well, because at its core, it's racist, and it sees in the subjugation of people of color, Palestinians, Arabs, a mirror image of their own racism. And I think that that is why ruling elites and powerful entities like the Christian right are so fervently backing Israel, that it is a modern expression of traditional racism as espoused by settler colonial projects. I just read Caroline Elkin's book on the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya. And it's a good book, although I did check. She's not said anything about Gaza, but it's a good book. And you look at the British brutality, and it matches not only in terms of rhetoric, but in terms of concentration camps and torture and wholesale executions, exactly what the Israelis do to the Palestinians. So.
Then there is the other segment that I see not as much with you, but with most of your colleagues, from Christopher Hitchens to not just Sam Harris, but elements of that in even Professor Richard Dawkins, who I greatly admire, is this complete inability to understand geopolitics of empire, of the whole war on terror. And then my sense is that, while the starting point is very nice about fighting dogmatism, it has essentially turned into Islamophobia, and even worse is complicity with American empire. Does that worry you?
Well, that's a big question. I am worried about many things, but I do think that people are often labeling people is a dangerous thing. And for example, I think I've heard Richard be claimed to be Islamophobic. I don't think he is. I think he's realistic. He's just, they don't say he's Christian phobic, but they jump on the fact, which he's as anti-Christian as he is, as well as he is anti-Islam. What he's against, as what I am against, is fundamentalism, is religious fundamentalism, and that includes, by the way, secular fundamentalism. But so it is a true statement that.
But what about Hitchens and Harris?
Let me just finish this. Yeah. Look, religious fundamentalism in the Christian world in the 12th and 13th century produced incredible acts of violence. Okay, but what's happened is, it's an old religion, and Christian fundamentalism now produces dangerous things like claiming that a 12 cells in an embryo is a baby, which there's some ridiculous Supreme Court in Alabama just said. I think it was Alabama. But it doesn't advocate the active killing of other people. It used to. Islam is 600 years younger, and it seems to be in the stage where Christianity was in the 12th and 13th century, where Islamic fundamentalists, not Islam, but Islamic fundamentalists are claiming that they need to do violence in the name of their God, which is just what used to be the call for hundreds of years in Christianity. So I think it's fair to say that Islamic fundamentalism is a greater threat to the immediate physical safety of people than, and also the difference is that most Christians nowadays call themselves Christians for no reason. They like to think of themselves as Christians because it makes them think of themselves as good people. They don't believe the nonsense in the Bible, most of it. They may believe in Christ, but they don't believe in, the virgin birth or transubstantiation or any of the other things. The difference is in Islam right now, it's kind of an all or nothing thing for many people. So that you, in many societies, especially Islamic fundamentalist societies, you're finding that you cannot be considered Muslim unless you believe the nonsense that in Christianity we've already dispensed with. You don't have to believe in Christianity that that stoning your children if they're bad is a good thing, even though it says so in the Bible, right? People just
No one
say it doesn't.
stones.
But in Islam right now, people seem to think that everything that's in the Quran, which was written at a medieval time when people didn't understand anything about nature, that somehow every edict of that has to be taken exactly, including cutting the hands of people or killing infidels or whatever. I expect that kind of nonsense will disappear over time if the world survives, as Islam becomes more like Christianity, where people say, well, I like some of the tenets of Islam, and I like calling myself a Muslim, but I don't believe this nonsense about Muhammad flying in a horse that didn't exist to a place that didn't exist at a time that, and so I think it's fair to say that's not Islamophobic, that's just realism. But I think that I think that when you're talking about supporting American imperialism, if that's what well, I think there are people whose politics do lend in that direction, but that's a political question. It's not based on their being a scientist or even based on their liking or disliking religion. And the question of what's going on in Israel right now is a good example. You'll find people, it's really brought to the fore people who might complain about, say, someone like Sam Harris. But it's a political. But when Sam Harris is talking about that, he's talking politics. He's not talking science. Fear and ignorance breed demands for certainty and sometimes violence, and we need to overcome that. I think that's where science is good. Is the good thing about science is telling people there aren't absolute certainties. We don't absolutely know anything in some ways, which I can define if you want. And so science is, and we can change our minds. And that's a real problem. In my mind, the real problem with religion is it assumes answers before it asks the questions. It claims that certain things are true regardless of the evidence. And that's antithetical to human progress. But it's not just true for organized religions. I would argue it's true for statements on the left and right about modern anti-racism and things like that, where claims are made independent of evidence, and often nonsensical claims. And so that's a scientist, my interest is in fighting superstition and fighting dogma wherever it lies. And dogma is simply that, the assertion that things are true without evidence. And that stands in the way of human progress and human happiness, in my opinion. Even though for some people it gives them momentary happiness, believing in a divine being that takes care of them and cares about everything they do every day, for some people makes them happy, and I understand it. And I'm not one who's going to tell someone that they should stop doing that. It's when those beliefs affect their actions that I worry about. And those dogmatic beliefs inevitably produce irrational and harmful actions, I would argue, which is the real danger. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to leave Lawrence with one a very different questions, but just as a very short response, and forgive me if I'm indulging too much.
Right.
You told about chopping off hands, and that's sort of I really needed to respond that, right? Stoning people and chopping hands, and I read reports against human rights violation from Amnesty International, to whole range of reports that come out of prisons. And yes, you are right. Like you get reports about, let's say, Taliban in Afghanistan, or sometimes
say
Iran.
say the government of Iran.
Okay, but you get a lot.
Iran's a great example of a medieval group of medieval fools holding back the rest of the country.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I get many more records about the abuse of the prison system in the US, which looks as grotesque and as arbitrary. The whole Zionist imprisonment of Palestinian refugees, the torture system within modern prison system.
I think you're right. And the modern prison system in the United States is abysmal. It's not based, however, I guess the difference is it's not based on some higher ethics. It's not saying we want to treat people miserably because we don't, because it's in our ethos that these people don't matter. At least the verbiage is that they do. In practice, they may not. But the verbiage in Iran is exactly that our God or our whatever tells us that these people have to be killed
These
because
are abuses of authorities and institutions who have arbitrary power. I grew up with
oh,
millions of Muslims in India. No one
okay.
chopped off anyone's head.
No,
In fact, it was the
India's not
Hindus who were.
India's well, there are other problems in India, but there are problems everywhere.
Yeah.
But the treatment of Muslims might not be a problem in India, it might be a problem in Ethiopia or Sudan or other places where I think there are more Muslims that are killed by Muslims than anywhere else. But but I think look, the point is I don't think you can make two wrongs don't make a right. And
I agree
it's
with you.
absolutely
Yeah.
right. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right that the only that there that one shouldn't there are many abuses around the world and we should understand them and try and solve them. There are some I would say that are endemic and some that are not, but and some that are much more complex. But I think it is true. As let me use the words of my late colleague, since we're ending now anyway, a Nobel Prize winner Steve Weinberg in physics. He said, there are good people and there are bad people. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things. When good people do bad things, it's religion.
And that's probably true around the
It
world.
might be, but I think the point is that there nothing is black and white, as you just said. Nothing is simplistic. There are subtleties everywhere, and people who live in glass houses perhaps shouldn't throw stones, but so I've tried to criticize lots of aspects on the left and the right and the west and the east, um, uh, but um, but the fact that I think the bottom line is I would say it's the fact that the prison system in the United States is criminal should not stop us from condemning other
I agree.
atrocities rather than the rest of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.